I just wondered, first of all, how many people out there identify as software architects? Hands up, is there a bunch of, yeah, there's a few software architects, yeah? And how many people would say they're mainly software developers? Is that the rest of you? Yeah, yeah. And are there any consultants out there? Yeah, oh, there's a few of them as well, right. So I think this one could go down quite well, right? So what I learned was that a software architect is someone who knows a little bit about a lot of things. And they go on learning about more and more things until they know nothing about everything. Now, a software developer is someone who starts off knowing a lot about one thing. And they go on to learn more and more about less and less until they end up knowing everything about nothing. And, of course, a consultant starts off knowing everything about everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't get any jobs. And through working with the software architects and the software developers, they end up knowing nothing about anything.
Yep.
So anyone that identifying there? Yeah. No. Okay. So the other thing I'm going to do, which Erwin seems to have failed with, is that I'm going to try and get you to use Slido to moderate these questions. So everyone get your phones out. This is your opportunity to actually look at your phones and contribute to the talk. And type in sli.do into your browser. Okay? Can you do that? Okay. Has everyone got Slido up? Yep. So the number, whoops, there it is. Come on. Intern can't turn on the phone. 1835 836. Right? 1835 836. And this is all to help the intern moderate the questions. Woo! Okay. So let's introduce the panel. So first of all, here on my left, I've got Prakriti Mateti. Yeah, correct. Director of Engineering at Cultramp, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And I've heard great things about Cultramp. Now tell me, are you great at engineering culture, or are you great at cultivating engineers? I'm a little confused there.
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Okay, good.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Yeah. And Brigid O'Brien, transformation executive at ThoughtWorks, is that right? Yeah. ThoughtWorks, also a great company. Yeah. Now, is it about thinking about work, or is it working on thinking?
Oh, all of the above again. It's like you need to work on thinking so that you can get better at thinking about work and executing the work, so it all feeds itself.
Okay, great. And Chris Simon, I don't think you need
terrified.
Do you? Part-time CTO, organizer of this fantastic conference.
Co-organizer.
Sorry, with Sonal. And just general, domain-driven expert around town, conference speaker extraordinaire. Yeah?
Oh, I'm not terrified anymore. Thank you.
Are you this or are you this?
This is white privilege in action and male privilege in action. So.
No, you're going to get me to shut up soon. So what I thought was that I would start off by putting some questions to the panel, and then hopefully I'll start looking at Slido, and I'll see some questions coming from you folks. Does that work? Yeah. Okay. So actually, they're all, by the way, primed by Craig. Yeah. So if you don't like the questions, you better go talk to Craig Brown. Right. So the first thing that he was suggesting I ask was Prakriti. How do you make sure that the new build doesn't repeat the mistakes of the old build? Yeah?
So there's no softballs to kick off this conversation. $1 million question.
Do you want to just talk?
No, that sounds good. That is a good question. So I think for us, what we did, so for context, we're at the tail end of an 18-month rebuild right now. And I'm wondering this very question, because it's been a huge investment. And I'm asking myself, how do we ensure that it doesn't repeat the mistakes, but also it doesn't decay to the point of starting over again. So great question. I think we started with clearly articulating the problem statement, talk number one, thank you. And a part of that problem statement described what was our impetus, what was wrong with the old system and what did we do that didn't work, what got us to the point of decay and to the point of rebuilding. And as we've gone through the 18-month journey, we've had several checkpoints looking back at that original problem statement to assess whether we are still on the right track and whether we are going to correct those mistakes or not. So I think that's the first one we did. The second thing is we articulated our trade-offs, what we were choosing to optimize for and what we were not choosing to optimize for. So this rebuild is not going to solve all the problems that exist in the entire universe. It is seeking to solve a very simple set of problems, and it also articulates what it's not seeking to solve. So we know that someday in the future we may have other problems that we need to solve as well. And then I think the third one is kind of measuring success as you go. So we are rebuilding iteratively, and with every slice that we push out, we are measuring success to make sure that we're not straying from this path. So we're putting it in production, we're getting feedback from customers, and we're measuring success.
Okay, so that prompts another thought in my mind, which is that how far or how good is good enough? How do you know where to draw the line in terms of the right quality in your new build?
Yeah, very tough question, which we had to answer at the start. So I think the way we did it was to attach sort of a Goldilocks time frame to this project. When you start a rebuild from scratch, it's quite tempting, I think, to just gold plate it and create something beautiful because you've gotten the permission to start over. But that will take 4 or 5 years. It's never ending. Producing something perfect is never ending. But you also want to use this opportunity to produce something that's high quality, meets all the latest standards, is built on the latest tooling, and provides you with a domain model and an architecture that's going to serve you many years into the future. So how do you kind of balance these competing needs? We decided to do it by implementing a Goldilocks time frame. So it's not so long that you can gold plate everything. It's long enough that you can actually build it right, but it's also not so short that you have to make too many compromises, but it's short and tight enough that it really forces you to think about trade-offs. So you can't get your way with every decision because you don't have 5 years, but you're also not going to produce something that's rubbish quality because you're trying to do it in 6 months. So we created a time frame that we felt would force everyone working on it to make trade-offs every day that resulted in something that was good enough.
Right. Okay, so thoughts, Brigid. I mean, in terms of, Prakriti's approach and your experiences, if you think about business value extracted out of platform rebuilds and the like, would you agree with the approach that
Yeah, it's very much aligned to the way that we like to work, and we've learned the hard way that you actually need to anchor to a lot of those things, establishing the business value, the trade-offs initially. I'm not involved in one at the moment, as you are. I've been involved in many variations in product leadership and delivery leadership, working alongside architects, etc. And I think that, so in answering the question, I probably elaborate as well on some of the lessons learned from that. And I think, like the original question was, how do you make sure it doesn't happen again? I think one of the big things is about the culture, and about particularly the engineering culture and the attitude toward value in the organisation. Because if you're not appreciating that, the classic what got you here won't get you there, you actually need to do something differently this time than you did building the last one. Whether it be practices, whether it be in capabilities, it might be in skill sets or languages, but something needs to be acknowledged as being different, because it's all too easy, even with a new build, to just regress into the old practices, the old patterns, if you're not also changing the cultural mindset for how this needs to be different from that. The other thing I think is really important is, because it's about, migration onto the new. And so I'd describe it as a coexistence tax, because while you're building this new, you're coexisting with the old. And I have seen organisations get into lots of deep trouble if they're not paying attention to how expensive it is to coexist on multiple platforms when you're needing sometimes to build something twice as you're rebuilding, or even that the tax of not having new features out in prod for 12 to 18 months until you get something that can actually start to deliver new feature build on top of the rebuild. And probably third lesson that is always a sticky one is commitment, because I've seen so many organisations get partway through, and I think definition of done was sort of, when is good enough? And it's like, right, we're halfway across the river. This is really, really hard. It's usually more expensive than we anticipated. Do we keep going to the other side of the river, or actually is it easier just to cut now and create a new form of coexistence? And I think having commitment to the end state and getting business buy-in to that is also hugely, hugely critical, in addition to all of those good things that you said.
Sure. So, Brigid, have you ever been in that situation where you've had to turn around to stakeholders and say, okay, no new features for the next 12 months,
Yes.
we're doing a rebuild? Yeah.
Yes.
How's that gone for you?
So it depends on the business drivers. So in this particular instance that I'm thinking of, the platform that we had was being decommissioned,
Yeah.
and the organisation, it was a COTS product, and they said, we're turning it off on this date. So we actually didn't have a choice.
Right.
And so we said, the business didn't have a choice. They wouldn't be able to make money if we did not rebuild this thing. And so that was kind of pretty clear. So that was an easier solve. But in other instances, it's this trap of, well, can we give them a bit? Can we give them a bit just to address those targets? Can we give them a bit? And that's when you get into the sticky place of, well, we have to build it here and then we have to duplicate it here. And actually the ROI of those kinds of decisions are usually net negative, because the cost of maintaining it twice and the complexity it adds is not worth it. So it's about having those discussions with the business. Sometimes they accept it, sometimes they don't, depends on their KPIs. But
Sure.
yeah, it's never an easy one.
Right, there's a bit to nibble on there, isn't there, Chris? Yeah? So do you want to give some thoughts on what you've just heard from Prakriti and Brigid?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the most important things I heard Prakriti say that I think is really important for anything like this is the deploying to production as you go and getting feedback from customers. I think the ones that I've seen that have gone disastrously have been we're just going to work on it over there,
Yep.
and 2 years later we're going to say, so is it ready? Yeah, sure, we'll turn it on tomorrow. And it can work, but it's very risky. And I think the ones that I've seen...
Have you actually seen it work?
I was involved in a company that recently, they managed to stagger it into 3 launches, but they couldn't do more than that. I was advocating for very regular releases, and they couldn't. So I think even just having 3 helps them. I don't think I've seen other people do just like a big bang, go live without issues. So getting released in production is good. But I think the thing probably that I would add to that, I'm a big advocate of, I guess that's that maxim, I can't remember who said it, but like, do the things that are painful more often.
Yep.
And if rewriting is the painful thing, you should be constantly rewriting from the start.
Sounds like an extreme programming.
Yeah, it kind of comes from that school. But I think, extreme programming and a lot of that is very much looking at the microcosm of like refactoring functions and classes. It's much harder, I think, to refactor continuously at the architectural level because, as we heard from Ross and others, there's the socio-technical factor and the impact on teams and sense of culture and belonging that they have attached to the various components that they own, and often it's hard for anyone to learn the lessons, because I think that's the other part of the thing that's hard that you should do regularly is not just refactor, but you need to be learning continuously. And I think the biggest risk that when you say like what should people, they need to be doing something differently with the rebuild, the thing I see that most people don't do with the rebuild, even though they change a lot of things, is that they do the rebuild thinking that they don't have to continuously learn as they're going. Right. So it's like, oh, we learnt everything now, we're going to spend 2 years rebuilding it using what we learnt then, and ignore the fact that you're going to learn things over that 2 year period as well. And if you don't incorporate those into that, even that window, that's, I think, one of the biggest drivers that leads people back into the mess that they started in. So I like to say, avoid the rebuild completely by refactoring continuously from the start, and then you never really even have the idea of a rebuild project because teams are just continuously rebuilding.
Okay. You mentioned socio-technical, very topical with Ross's talk this morning, and of course it's a big talking point, which I think you run courses on it as well. So I'm interested in, have you ever experienced that problem where you're both rebuilding the system and there's a reorg going on at the same time? So it's actually even new people that are working on the system that you're rebuilding.
So the knowledge has been lost, and So when I talk about socio-technical systems, I think Ross's definition was good about the idea that it's like a joint optimization of the people and the technology. The way I personally think about it is like the people are part of the system, and so removing a person is like deleting a production database without a backup, because it's a critical component of the socio-technical system.
Next time a CEO does a bit of a downsize,
it's like it's the socio-technical equivalent, of deleting production databases. So have I seen that happen? Yeah, like definitely. There's always, most organisations are constantly doing reorg, so these things do happen, and I think. One thing I've been pondering is like what it's offering driving that is a disconnect between sort of the people who have the responsibility for setting the org structure and how their mental model of the world and their mental model of the domain, and then the engineers and the architects and their mental model of it. And I've been stuck in that where I've been saying, we need the components to look like this for these architectural reasons. So I'd really like it if you made the organisation look like that. And they're saying, no, but we need the organisation to look like this because of these sort of, customer-facing reasons. We need these salespeople to be dealing with these customers and these support people to be dealing with these customers. Like, but that doesn't suit me. It's a constant negotiation, I think.
I think it comes down to buy-in as well, right? Like if you are doing a major rewrite that's going to have significant impact on the business, and you have gotten buy-in up to a certain point, but not all the way to the top. Like, has exec bought in? Has the board bought in? And if they haven't, then I think there will likely be a disconnect with reorgs at some point during the life cycle of this rewrite. But if you've managed to secure buy-in all the way across the organization, cross-functionally with your customer group, your sales org, your board, and your exec, then maybe I'm an optimist, but I feel like in that environment, when there is time to do a reorg or redundancies or RIF, then it will at least be a variable in that conversation. Like you will be part of the discussion. But I think a lot of these rewrites struggle because they think they have buy-in, but it's not true buy-in.
Right. I'm going to sort of see if I can go to the questions from Slido, because there's been fabulous. Thanks very much for your questions. Thanks also for the voting. So I'm going to try and pick the highest voted one here, which is, let's start with you, Prakriti. How did you identify the need to build, and how did you get execs on board?
Yeah, that's the first half of my conference talk on this topic, but I'll try to make it brief. So the need to build, first we tried everything else. I feel like no one's going to give me permission to do a massive rebuild that costs a very large number of dollars unless they feel convinced that we've tried everything else. So first we tried to identify, name, and remove all the tech debt that was slowing us down. Then we realized that would take really long and it wouldn't solve all the problems. We had an outdated underlying domain model. So second, we tried refactoring in place, where we tried to redo the underlying domain model piecemeal. And we did that for like a year, and we realized that even if we continued working on tech debt and on the piecemeal domain model for several years, we would still not get out of the hole that we were in, because there were several other problems that we were dealing with as well, like shared concerns inside a monolith, 8 teams working inside the same monolith, lots of coupling, stepping on each other's toes. So we could try all these piecemeal things, but we came to the realization that none of them would get us to our destination faster than actually a full platform rebuild. So to be able to say that and make people believe it, we needed the data to back it up. We needed to prove all the things that we had tried previously and show why that was the right answer. So that was the first part of the question. Buy-in was really hard, actually. So tough economic climate right now, and then saying, hey, we need to take a couple of years off, you're not going to get any new features, and we're going to try and rebuild this whole thing. That was really challenging. So I think for buy-in, firstly, we worked with a very high degree of transparency. So as we were doing all the work I described before, the stakeholders were with us on the journey. They were getting outcomes and updates very frequently, and we invited them into our discussion conversations. So we started by saying, hey, let's get a bunch of engineers in the room and say, draw out your ideal architecture, forget about today's constraints, and then compare how different does the ideal architecture and domain model look from what we have today. If it looks vastly different, people are going to see it for themselves. Then we got all the stakeholders together and tried to figure out how we might bridge that gap. What would an ideal solution look like? And we didn't talk about it as though it was a technical decision. We talked about it as though it was an organizational decision. So the architecture and the domain model is one layer, but then the other layer is who are the teams that are going to work on this? And then the other layer on top of that is what's the product roadmap? Where do we want this product to go in the next few years? So combine all these layers together, and then I think that's when you start building the buy-in. And then finally was exec and the board. That was hard. So for exec buy-in, we called in an external advisor, someone who was trusted by exec and the board, and we got to kind of sit down with this person, and they poked a lot of holes, asked a lot of really hard questions, and sort of agreed that it made sense to do the rebuild. So that was like building more trust with them. And then finally there was a board pack which told the holistic journey of that entire product. So bringing it out of the technical weeds and talking about the journey this product is going to go on in the next 2 or 3 years, and what is the rebuild role in that journey. Like, it's just one step in that process, and what does that step mean to the entire journey holistically.
Wow, sounds very impressive. I've got a bunch of questions coming up now. I don't know, Brigid, Chris, do you want to jump in with that question?
Can I add to that one? Yeah. You know, if you think of particularly with boards and execs and the 4 levers, I've spoken about this before, the revenue protection, revenue growth, cost avoidance, cost reduction. We've had success linking. It's very, as you say, it's very difficult getting buy-in to a tech investment, which is primarily potentially seen as cost reduction, cost avoidance, linking it to future revenue growth, and saying if we don't do this, then these 3 key strategic growth opportunities will not be realised, is also a really powerful way to get buy-in. Yeah.
In some ways it was easy for us because it was not possible. It was simply not possible to get the product to where they wanted it to go in the market. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to build on what Brigid was saying, I think a really simple model I've found super helpful for understanding why any organisation does anything is that it's either you want to make more money, you want to spend less money, or you want to manage risk. It's one of those 3 things. And I think like your more sophisticated description of those simple terms, but as a general rule, what I find is architects and engineers are really focused on cost reduction and risk management, and everyone else in the business is focused on revenue generation. And that's why so many conversations are talking like this. Their priorities, their values are just completely different. And I found, echoing what you're saying, is that the best thing we can do is to start talking the revenue language, and that'll help bridge that gap.
Right. So there's a question here from Ben, which actually sounds like the answer you already gave, Chris, but I'll still ask it because it got a lot of votes. And the question is a rebuild a symptom of unsustainable decisions leading to decay, or are they an unavoidable fact of life in software development? Maybe you want to kick that one off?
I'll just say, I think they are avoidable.
Yeah.
But I don't have any data to back that up. Maybe it's an aspiration. But I have a belief that if you start a project with continuous delivery, continuous learning, and a culture of continuous refactoring as you learn as you go, then you could, in theory, avoid a rebuild. The best data point I can give you for it is we did a startup. 3 years into the startup, we realized that whether we had built the wrong thing or whether the business had pivoted, I'm not going to say, but we definitely needed to do something about it. We embarked on a progressive, iterative rebuild, we got the first new component of the rebuild into production within a month. It was generating revenue within a month, and progressively rebuilt it from that point. Took 5 years, one of former engineering managers in the team. 4 years later, turned off all the components from the old thing. But in the new system, we didn't do this in the first build, but in the rebuilds, we did start with progressive refactoring and continuous refactoring. And I hope that doesn't need to be rebuilt in the same way. But I guess it depends on what timescales you need to think about, because it's been going for a while, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree with what you're saying in a specific context, because I think, the example I gave before where the vendor just said, we're turning this off, right? So you've got that. I think also situations I've seen where you don't actually have control of the entirety of the stack, where you depend on vendors. And that is a power imbalance. That means you've lost control of your stack. Yeah, and I've seen untenable vendor relationships with third-party providers where we just actually, this is a business risk that we don't control this capability, we need to build it in-house. So you have to sort of start from scratch there. So I think it's an it depends kind of conversation, but where you have control of your stack, ideally, yes, you want to be avoiding rebuilds. If you can, I agree with the constant refactoring principle if you've got control of that, but sometimes you don't. So.
Can I add maybe a third variation on this? Sometimes, sometimes things just change, right? And so there may be a tiny startup that's trying to bring a product to life. It might be Series A, and they may think they understand what the market needs, and they might bring it to life. They might get 300 customers. It's great. 10 years on, they've iterated aggressively because they're trying to just keep this baby alive in the market. So of course it's got all the usual problems of these software solutions, but sometimes the market changes, right? So I'm talking about a performance product. Sometimes the market decides that the way we used to do performance management is outdated and old, and systems have evolved and people have evolved, and the way we assess and measure performance has changed, and now we want to do it fundamentally a bit differently. So I think it's not necessarily a symptom of decay, or sometimes it's not like a vendor choice that forced your hand, but sometimes it's just not evil, it's the right thing to do, because fundamentally the way you think about this product has changed so much that the decisions you made and the domain model you built is just not going to take you forward anymore.
And this again echoes Ross talk about it's an open system.
Yeah,
We're talking about the socio-technical system, the ecology around it is involved. Socio-ecological, technological system. Bit of a mouthful. But yeah, you're right. It's just, but sometimes those changes can be so small, and it's the frog in the boiling pot, and you don't realise until it's drastically different. Another mental model I think can really help with thinking about that is Wardley mapping, which if anyone hadn't heard about, it's definitely something to look into. The general idea is you can chart it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it, but the key concept I'm referring to is you can chart the evolution of things, ideas, products, whatever, in broadly 4 stages, starting out with Genesis, everything's completely new, moving into custom, so it's not completely new, there's a general structure around it, but it's usually customized. Then it's a standard product that you can buy, and then it's a commodity that becomes a utility. And I think the journey you just described made me think of a product that was Genesis and innovative in its early days. The market now expects it to be a utility, expects it to be a commodity, but you'll still have a system that was built when it was an evolutionally innovative Genesis product. And it's very hard to escape that, systemic change around you.
Yeah.
So I've got a great little question here, which doesn't have the highest votes, but I love it. What, if any, are the signs that you're building the legacy system of the future? Are there signs of non-longevity to look out for? Anyone want to take that one?
I think you have to work with the assumption that you are building. That you just accept it and move on, and try and work with ways to make it as self-repairing as possible, really, because if you want your investment to persist, then it will be a legacy asset probably sooner than you think.
Self-repairing sounds interesting. There's might be a conference talk in there.
Yeah.
I think as a rule of thumb, I agree, generally speaking, we're all building the legacy of tomorrow, it's just kind of the world. But if you've gone 2 months without refactoring, the probability goes massively up. You might think you're not, but if you've gone 2 months without doing any refactoring, you're probably more like 95% building the legacy of the tomorrow.
Probably, I like it. Yeah,
no,
but again, it depends on that. Well, it depends on the size of the stack, right?
Yeah.
Because there will be some parts of the code base that are perfectly fine. Don't need to be refactored. They actually do their thing. I've known devs that come along 5 years later and go, "Oh, that thing I wrote 5 years ago is still there and it's still being used every day, and doesn't need to be." Some things actually just are fine as they are. So it's about prioritising your investment on refactoring, because not all of the code base needs to be refactored, but where are the priorities for refactoring, and making sure that there's intent and purpose behind it. Yeah.
So how are we feeling? There's lunch coming up. Are we getting hungry, or room for one more question? Yeah? Okay. One more? Okay, so the one I've got, I don't think we've answered it, but it's another anonymous. There must be a lot of anonymous out there. Rebuild is usually a big effort. What is usually your pivotal point when deciding you need to rebuild, rewrite your service rather than continually refactoring? Yeah? I don't think we've answered that, have we?
Maybe a little bit. I would love to try answering this because we had a pivotal point in April last year. And for us, the pivotal point was realizing, so I think I just sat down one day and I looked at all the stuff that we were currently doing to try and get this product to where it needed to be. I kept hearing, you have to fix performance. It has to be a market leading product and you have to fix it. And so I was like, all right, I guess we have to fix it. It's going to be market leading. Looking at what is market leading, what does it look like? What does that mean? And then looking at all the things that we were doing today and realizing that it's like, I've forgotten all my maths that I studied in my engineering degree, but what is that graph where it's like they're almost meeting, but they just keep going into infinity and they never actually meet? Thank you. And that's what it looked like to me, right? It looked like we could keep going down this path, but I just didn't feel like it was ever going to intersect.
Right.
So that was a pivotal point for me where I went, we need to explore alternate paths, and maybe one of those should be, let's burn it down and build it over from scratch.
That's a good one. Good answer. Yeah. Thoughts?
Any other pivotal points?
I have something in the back of my brain, but I'm struggling to articulate it. I think, in my experience, it's death by 1,000 cuts as opposed to a pivotal point, unless you have a massive outage that exposes all the things, or a major business risk that exposes all, and that can happen. That absolutely can happen. I think what I see with organisations is that they approach the cliff of like, because basically we're talking about a constraint, a scale constraint, and I think they approach that cliff slowly and then quickly, you know, and it'll be the business imperative that can't be delivered, you know, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we've been telling you this for a long time, and now you've hit the point where you can no longer delay this decision.
Yeah.
But organisations usually avoid that point, like generally they get ahead of it. Yeah, but we have, like, I have seen that where it's like, actually, like the experience I had where we're turning the system off, like you do hit those points. So I don't know that there's a single rule of thumb. It's where you can no longer scale this thing, really, and you can demonstrate that.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like the Ernest Hemingway quote about how you went bankrupt, you know, slowly, then suddenly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say Prakriti's answer.
Okay. So, have you gone hungry fast? Yeah. So, is it time to basically say thank you very much to this panel? Give them all a bit of a clap.